Hey everybody, my name is Dimos. I'm here doing a deck tech on my Rhinar Claw Blitz deck, and I'm looking forward to it. I love talking about this game. To give just a little bit of context on what this deck has done so far, I've been playing it pretty much unchanged for 3 or 4 weeks now, and I've top aided a few of the bigger 64-man skirmishes and won a bunch of armories and so on and so forth. So this deck, it has the capacity to win, that's for sure. And I'll go into details on how you do that and how sometimes it just doesn't happen. So to start with, I guess I'll run through my equipment. The core of the deck really comes off of these claws in combination with Blood Rush Bellow, which I'll get into a bit later. My general, I guess, default equipment is to run Scabskin Leathers, Hardened Cross Strap, Gambler's Gloves, and Arcanite Skullcap. Scabskin Leathers, they block for 3, and they everybody has a very strong opinion on this card, but at the end of the day, if they block for 3 and did nothing, I would still bring these. Sometimes you will be rolling that action point to try to get some action points. The only times I really roll for that is either if the only other thing I can do on my turn is pitch to throw a single claw, or maybe I can roll Scabskins and then pitch to throw a claw and do something else. Then I'll roll the Scabskins because the downside is very low. The other time I'll roll the Scabskins is after I've done a Blood Rush or I'm having some other big turn, and I know that if I do hit that 4, 5, or 6, that extra action point, that extra intimidate from the attack that I'm going to be putting out is going to be what guarantees me lethal. But unless I'm guaranteed lethal, or unless there's very little downside, I'm not rolling Scabskins. I prefer Hardened Cross Strap, generally speaking, because of its consistency, because this deck has a good amount of random elements. You do want to try to reduce those where you can. I do run Barkbone Strapping in the deck, but that's more for certain other options, when you need the armor more so than when you need the consistency. Gambler's Gloves are basically insurance on Scabskins. If I'm not running Gambler's Gloves, I'm never rolling Scabskins unless it is literally a do or die situation. And, if I roll a 6, maybe there's a chance I win. If I roll anything less than that, I lose. But otherwise, these two go together. If I don't have Gambler's Gloves, I will not be rolling Scabskins. It's that simple. And I run Arcanite Skullcap because it blocks for 3. And that's very helpful, especially in a deck where when you're going off on your big combos, you need, 4 or 5 card hands. Having, the extra armor to piece together to maybe block that onto effect or just survive that one extra turn is very helpful. So moving on to the other considerations, I run Barkbone Strapping, and this is something that I tech in against decks that are way too aggressive. So I run it against Warrior because, armor helps for blocking against Reprise, helps you survive that time a little bit longer or more. I run it against Mech, largely for the same reason. Just that one extra point of armor, you can survive a little bit longer to help until they, take an off turn or run out of gas a little bit. I run Skullhorn. The only time I run Skullhorn is against Wizard, primarily for the Arcane Barrier 2, or against a Viserai that I am confident is OTK. And so the only reason I run it against Viserai, you'll never use the Arcane Barrier 2 against Viserai. It's basically to try to get that extra Intimidate, to guarantee the 4th Intimidate, so you can come in for all the damage that you possibly can. Beyond that, in Wizard, it's a very interesting play to make, and it's really something you do after you do 2 other Intimidates, because you destroy the Skullhorn, you lose the Arcane Barrier 2, the Wizard gets a chance to respond before you draw and discard that card for the Intimidate. So if you destroy this, you lose a bunch of Arcane Barrier, and they have a great window to attack you. If you do it after a Barraging Beatdown or after some other type of Intimidate, then it's helpful because, they only have 2 cards to burn you with, and, maybe you're fine. I run Null Rune Boots and Null Rune Gloves. I prefer to run gloves in the Viserai matchups. And against OTK Viserai is one of the few times I'm okay rolling Scabskins without Gambler's Gloves, because what are they going to do on their turn? Odds are they're holding 3 defense reactions and maybe a single Read of Runes, so I'm not too worried about that. And then, you run both in the Skullhorn against Wizard. which means that against Wizard, the final piece you're running is Heart and Crosscraft. And the reason I particularly like that is because you can destroy Heart and Crosscraft and then throw out an attack, even if you have the extra resources, or even if you have the resources to play the attack anyways. Maybe you want to destroy this just to leave yourself that extra resource floating to block whatever they have when you're going for lethal. I am also running an Iron Rock Gauntlet, and this very rarely sees play. I think I should play it against Warrior more often than I do, but I don't, just on the basis that I like the Gambler's Gloves because it gives me effectively the confidence to roll scab skins to hit lethal on those big combo turns. So a lot of these pieces of equipment will be coming back up again in a minute once I go through how the different combo pieces interact with them. But until then, I think I'll move on to the next package of the deck. And the way I've split out this deck, and very much the way that I conceptualize this deck, is into three different categories. So we have the cards that will directly help you win the game. This is what your damage is. We have your resource cards, and we have meta tech cards, things that are in here for things that are in here to respond to what other decks do. So your defense reactor in here, your sigils in here, that kind of thing. So to start with, the most fun part of this is by far the primary engine, which is all your Blood Rush Bellow and all your red attacks. So I'm running 6 Barrage and Beatdown because it is probably one of the best, if not the best card in Brute, hands down. 0 cost, Intimidate for free, maybe you even get some bonus damage off of it. It's fantastic in just about every matchup. It basically guarantees that it's great on your combo turns, and it's also fantastic on your off turns, because if you play Barrage and Beatdown, you pitch and you swing your weapon, you're coming in for 5, 6, 7 damage off of 2 cards, one of which is staying in your deck, which as Brute sometimes matters a lot because you will burn through it really quick. And on the combo turns, this can be the difference for Intimidate. You put down 1 or 2 of these, you get the bonus damage off of it. It's a 5, 6, 7 life swing. For 0 resources, it's huge. I'm running Savage Feast and Pack Hunt, and these are both good cards. They're Brute cards, they hit for 6, and they have nice effects. So Pack Hunt is just 2 resources. It doesn't require you to discard, so you can play it either directly off Heart and Crossstrap, off of any floating resources you have. It's an easy card to drop onto the field. I don't think it's a great card to drop as a 2-card hand. I'd probably rather arsenal it and wait for my big Blood Rush turn before I just play it, raw. Savage Feast is a card that makes and works with its own combos, so it's not necessarily as good on your Blood Rush turns unless you're rolling for scab skins to get that extra action point, because the way it's costed, having to pay a resource and to discard a card is generally not, it's more expensive than what you want to be paying for after you've paid 5 resources to Blood Rush and then Claw again. However, if you play it right after your Blood Rush, it's a decent sized attack. It'll come in for damage, and it lets you draw to extend your combo to guarantee you'll be able to go Claw, and then maybe even a Pack Hunt if you've got something going on there. Because the card draw from it, so it makes you discard a card, but if the discarded card has 6 or more attack, you draw a card basically to replace the one you discarded, which can be fantastic. Something that combos particularly well with Savage Feast is Sand Sketch Plan. So Sand Sketch Plan, you can either go searching for a Savage Feast, or you can search Sand Sketch Plan into Beast Within if you already have the Savage Feast. Sand Sketch Plan gives you 2 action points plus it resolves. So if you discard a card with 6 or more, so you'll get the 2 action points, you'll play the Savage Feast, you'll draw from the Savage Feast, and then you'll probably have enough to pitch to Claw, and both your Claws have to go again. So that's, an alternative option combo for if you don't have Blood Rush, or for whatever reason your opponent, played a potion unexpectedly, and now you've got 4 cards and you're trying to stuff in. Other than that, along the top row, we have the real gems. Alpha Rampage is just fantastic at pushing damage, especially if you pair it with a Massacre. So Alpha Rampage requires you to discard 1. Ideally, you're discarding this 6 attack or more. It comes with Intimidate on its own. So that's 2 Intimidates right there, 1 from itself, 1 from Rhinar. If you can discard a Massacre with it, you intimidate off of Massacre's effect, making it 3 intimidates, and if you can play some kind of barrage and beatdown beforehand, guaranteed 4 intimidates, and you're coming in for, between 9 and 13 damage. It's a good card for pushing damage, but it's a lot of times the stars need to align for you to pull that one off. It's generally not worth keeping a 3-card hand to just play Alpha Rampage for 9 damage and 2 intimidates. You really want to push that 3rd or 4th intimidate on it to make the damage you push through on it dangerous. Otherwise, they'll block with 2 cards, take 3 damage, and that costs you 3 cards. Odds are they can hit you back with something better on their turn. Massacre is excellent either when you're discarding it for things like Savage Feast or Alpha Rampage for the extra intimidate. It's also an excellent card to Arsenal because on your Blood Rush Bellow turns, you can pop this, you can Claw Massacre out of Arsenal for 10, and you're coming in for a total of 20 damage with 1 to 2 intimidates, depending on how they block, which is hugely threatening. It strips their hand, and half the time you'll be able to throw in a barrage and beat down. And another reason why I specifically like Heart and Crossgrab in this is because if you can pitch 2 blues, so you'll pitch a blue to pay for your initial Blood Rush, you'll pitch another blue to pay for the other claw, and then the discount from Heart and Crossgrab means that Blood Rush Bellow, 2 claws, and a Massacre all cost only 6 resources and can be done with 2 pitched cards. So that's a particularly potent combo. It's 20 damage. It's quite good at stripping your opponent's hand. And one of the things to mention on the claws, just in case people aren't familiar, is that so it's 2 resources to attack for 3 damage. But if you discard a card with 6 or more, the claw does gain go again. So that's why you're seeing this deck have less of a focus on action points and more of a focus on resources. And you can see that in both, the value that I put in Heart and Crossgrab. You can see that in the fact that, there's no breakneck battery on this board of res here, meaning that I'm less concerned with the go again off the attack because I get the go again off the weapon instead. And then the real core of this deck, the card that will be winning you 90% of your games, the thing that a lot of times you're going to be blocking with 2, 3, 4 cards from your hand just to stop your opponent dealing you any damage until you draw one of these, because the second you draw one of these, you want to hold on to as many cards as you possibly can, and then you just go off on that crazy big 18, 20, sometimes even 30 damage turn, depending on how you draw. So Blood Rush Bellow, it costs 1 resource, it costs a discard. All of your brute attacks, weapons, and attack action cards gain +2. And if the card you discard has 2 or more, you get to draw 2 cards and Blood Rush gains go again. So effectively, you get a free intimidate. It replaces itself and the card it discarded. So its net effective cost to you for an intimidate and +2 to all your attacks this turn is 1 resource, which is absolutely phenomenal. The only downside is you don't know what you're drawing into, so you can't always plan for it. But the sheer power of the card makes it worth it. This is your absolute bread and butter. I rarely end up arsenaling this card because it's just so good to play on the turn that I draw it. And a lot of times I'm fine playing it off of a 4-card hand. Sometimes I'll play it off of a 3-card hand. My most common play pattern is, depending on what I have in Arsenal, it will affect how I play it. So if I have Defense React in Arsenal, I'll probably just block with Armor and the Defense React. If I have something like Massacre or Pack Hunt or Alpha Rampage in Arsenal, then and that is the order in which I value those in Arsenal, by the way. I think Massacre is the best one for the Blood Rush Bellow combo to have in Arsenal, then Pack Hunt, then Alpha Rampage. Savage Feast is good to have in Arsenal, but is quite reliant on those Blood Rush Bellow turns, on you hitting an extra action point from those Gaskins. Or from Savage Feast if you can somehow get that out after your Blood Rush. But this card is the absolute core of your deck. A lot of times, especially when I'm playing against Warrior or against the newer aggro versions of Ira, I will be blocking 3 or 4 cards from hand every single turn, basically waiting until I see this card in my hand and then making it work and going into big turns after that. So I cannot overstress how important this card is, and in fact, the only reason that I run a Remembrance, which is a card that doesn't block, in a meta in which you only have 20 life against aggressive decks like Warrior, is because is to get these blood rushes back. So maybe you'll have a bad blood rush turn, or you won't be able to get both of them off. You can Remembrance, bring them back in, and it gives your deck the gas that it needs to get to where it wants to go. So moving on from there to the resource package, which I've touched on a little bit already. I am running 1 Beast Within, 2 Sand Sketch Plans, Command and Conquers, 2 Yellow Savage Swing, 2 Yellow Barraging Bighorn, 2 Yellow Smash Instinct, and 2 Yellow and 2 Blue Wrecker Romp. So the reason I consider this to be basically the resource package is because these are the cards that you want to be playing around with, pitching and discarding, or otherwise using on your off turns. So it might be weird that I consider Command and Conquer a resource card, but fundamentally what it is it's a card to stall until I see my better cards, and or it has its attack, so you can just discard it and not worry about it. Command and Conquer is a great 2-card hand. You pitch 1, you play Command and Conquer, it's 6 damage. They're either going to have to block with a huge amount of their armor, which you're happy about because you're going to intimidate away their hand eventually later, or with 2 cards from their hand, which you're also happy about because it means they're going to come back at you with something weaker next turn, and maybe that's a turn you draw into Blood Rush, or maybe that gives you an opportunity to arsenal something in order to be ready for when you draw into your Blood Rush. So Command and Conquer here is, a resource card, an off-turn card, or something you're looking to discard. Sand Sketch Plan, I do fundamentally consider it a resource card because the vast majority of the time I do pitch it. But as I explained earlier, with it combos well into Savage Feast, or it can combo well after a Blood Rush if you draw into it. I will say, I never play Blood Rush if there is anything other than 6 attack cards in my hand. I will never play a Blood Rush if there's a chance that the Blood Rush will fail. I want that guarantee, even if it comes at the cost of not having a 4th card in hand. And it's quite easy to control that because you can pitch, the non-attack action instead of being forced to discard it. Sand Sketch Plan occasionally can be good in Arsenal if you know that you're kind of short on outs in other capacities, or you're confident that their deck is slow enough that you can play Sand Sketch and make a huge 5-card hand. Sand Sketch into Beast Within is a very nice combo because basically you get a free Intimidate, a free 2 action points, and Beast Within will replace itself, all for the cost of 0 resources, but some total amount of life. And the reason there's only 1 Beast Within here is because I've been burned too many times before. If Beast Within banishes Blood Rush Bellow, or Reckless Swing, or one of your important defense reactions, then a lot of times that can just be the game right there. I've had games where I've banished a total of 5 cards, Blood Rush Bellow, 2 defense reactions, a Barraging Beatdown, and it single-handedly lost me the game there. I will rarely rely on Beast Within for its effect. A lot of times I'm using it to block. It can be very good if you are against slower control decks where you need to get that extra card to push over the top the total of their armor and their life gain and all that stuff. But I do only run 1, mainly because I'm quite afraid of it. And I do like the idea of that consistency. I don't want to take the risk of banishing something I'm going to need later. And then down at the bottom here, we've got Yellow Savage Swing, which, really never wants to see play. If you're playing a Yellow Savage Swing, you want to be playing a red Savage Feast because they cost the same, and Savage Feast lets you draw a card. But sometimes you'll end up playing it after you Blood Rush and draw into some awkward stuff, or you have too many resources, so you figure you may as well put something on the board. Barraging Bighorn is 99% of the time a resource card. 1% of the time, you can make some interesting turns and force your opponent to block with it if they, for whatever reason, don't put pressure on and leave you with cards in hand. Smash Instinct is probably, your 3rd best 2-card hand, or, maybe 2nd best. You pitch for it, you attack for 6 with a single Intimidate. It's the same thing you do with Command and Conquer, it just doesn't have the on-hit effect, where, you're turning 2 cards, you're trying to get 2 cards from them to buy you time to find your big combo pieces. And then Wrecker Romps are purely resource. Blue Wrecker Romp is fantastic because it is the ideal resource card. It has 6 attack, it comes in blue, and it blocks 3. Yellow Recuromp realistically should be replaced with Yellow Riled Up, because Yellow Riled Up is much more playable. I just don't have any, and it's that simple. So that's the resource suite. Moving on to what I think is the most interesting and the most flexible portion of this deck, which is what I call the meta section, or cards that you're running in response to other decks. So here you'll notice there's kind of some weird stuff going on. So Reckless Swing, while it's in this section, I do really consider it to be one of the core elements of the deck. A lot of times you'll be 1 or 2 points short of lethal on your big Blood Rush or your Alpha Rampage turns, and Reckless Swing a lot of times is a great way to clutch out the game while you block with your whole hand, and you wait and finish with Reckless Swing when you know they're low enough on life, even though you haven't attacked them in 4 or 5 turns. And I'll go into the general strategy of this deck and why it's so important to know your outs and calculate your outs. And Reckless Swing a lot of times does end up being those outs. So I run 1 Red Sigil, partially to counteract, primarily to counteract Ira, partially to counteract Wizard, and deal with other weird little chip damage that you see from Viscera. It would be nice to run 2 Red Sigils, but because of the prevalence of Warrior, I've replaced one of them with a Red Sink Below. And realistically, depending on who you think is going to be showing up at the tournament, you'll put 2 Red Sinks or 2 Sigils. These can kind of be swapped in and out for one another. 2 yellow Springboard Somersaults I particularly like because they're yellow, so you can pitch them for just about anything that this Brute deck does. You can pitch it for a Claw, you can pitch it to start off a Blood Rush Bellow turn, you can pitch it for Command and Conquer, and then the downside is it's awkward until you manage to get it into your arsenal. As mentioned earlier, Brute is a deck that runs through its cards very, very quickly, so I'm running Remembrance as a way to basically shuffle some of those decks back in. Against certain decks, especially against control decks, 2 Blood Rush Bellows isn't going to be enough gas to kill them, get through all their armor and all their life gain. Blue Energy Potion and Blue Sink Below. So this deck has in total only 10 blues. So whatever these 2 cards are, they do need to be blue. I run the Energy Potion partially. It's pretty good against aggro decks because it lets you put it down and then it turns your Blood Rush turns into only really needing 2 cards in order for you to get a Claw and an attack off for a total of 13 damage with 2 Intimidates. So it can be quite helpful there. Obviously very helpful versus Wizard, and it's also helpful against a lot of the control matchups where you really need that extra bit to go over the top to push all the way through them. There's a very strong argument for running Time Snap instead of Energy Potion to basically guarantee that you can, after you Blood Rush, play an attack card to get the Intimidate off of that attack and then come in with the Claws afterwards. So that's kind of a toss-up depending on what your preference is and what you're worried about seeing. And ideally, if you do run Time Snap, it makes Iron Rock Gauntlet much, much more viable because you don't need Gambler's Gloves in case you're trying to push for that, Scab Skin roll for lethal. You won't need to do that with a Time Snap. You can just pop it and you have the guaranteed action points. But Energy Potion does help. As I said, your big turns are expensive. They're going to cost you between 6 and 8 resources at minimum. And so that extra 2 really helps. Blue Sink Below, it's good at blocking second Kodachi. It pitches for 3, and it's, worst case scenario, you play it as a react. Sometimes it's quite handy, and it lets you sink something to smooth something else out. And generally, the things that you're trying to smooth out are not holding, these cards in your hand at the same time, because Reckless Swing is a fantastic card. It's a terrible defense reaction. It's fundamentally saying you're paying 2 cards and you're blocking for 4. It's good purely because of the damage, not because of anything that it's stopping your opponent from doing. Every other card in the deck, other than Energy Potion and Reckless Swing, can be played around Reckless Swing. So if I'm holding a Sink Below, a Reckless, an attack, and something else, I can block with all the other ones and then play Reckless, discard the attack, guarantee the 2 damage. The only things that stop that from happening are either a second copy of Reckless Swing or having the Energy Potion. So if you are going to be going for a Reckless Swing endgame to try to get them to 0, you really need to make sure you know where one or both of these is. Otherwise, my general philosophy is you never ever want to gamble with the nature of the cards you're discarding, right? I will not play a reckless swing if I'm trying to get a springboard somersault into arsenal the next turn. Because if I then discard my springboard somersault, well, one defense reaction just cost me, two defense reactions. It wasn't worth it at all, and now I don't deal them 2 damage. So those things are kind of interesting to play around. In Sigil, the instants are also quite good because on your turn, if you're going to do something that requires you to discard a card, you can just play them and not worry about them. And sometimes the right answer is to just play Remembrance and shuffle back 3 random cards instead of pitching it for the end game, because you've got your end game in hand right now. You don't necessarily need to have a thin deck to have an end game with this deck. I do think there's a strong argument for replacing Sink Below with something like Savage Feast blue or Swing Fist Think Later blue, something else that, it's not going to be a 6 attack card, but it will be a blue, it'll block for 3, and it'll give you some alternative options. But for the time being, I do quite like the blue Sink. It's decent enough to arsenal in a pinch, and it lets you smooth out if you draw, some mix of these cards. And sometimes towards the end game, that is what you do because you tend to pitch blues quite often. But I do recommend trying to get the energy potion out if you can, even if that means, blocking with an otherwise decent hand and then just playing it afterwards. So that's the general gist of the deck. I think one of the key strategy elements of this deck is knowing how much damage you're going to have to deal to your opponent, right? And knowing what you can expect to do in that instance. So Bloodrush Bellow, 2 claws and an attack, is going to deal an average of 18 damage. It can go, up to 20 if you're playing a Massacre, 21 if you manage to get an Alpha Rampage out there, or even, 25 or 29 if you can throw in a barrage and beatdown or 2. Obviously, Bloodrush Bellow into Bloodrush Bellow is another fantastic thing because instead of 5 with Go Again, D7 with Go Again, and your attacks get even stronger, which pushes your upper limit up to, about 30-ish damage in a single turn. But you need to consider anytime you're playing a barraging beatdown on a Bloodrush Bellow turn, you need to be able to know confidently if they have a defense react in their arsenal. Because if they have a defense react in their arsenal and they play it with that last card in their hand, turn off your barraging beatdown damage, odds are you don't quite have the gas to get through either on this turn or maybe even the next one, or your next big turn. So at the beginning of each match, look at how much armor your opponent has. So Iras almost always have 4, Warriors almost always have 10. Most Iras make up that difference by running double red sigil. Some Warriors also run 2 red sigils. If a Warrior is running 2 red sigils against you, it's a very tough match because you somehow need to defend against them, but also find the gas to deal 36 damage to their total effective HP. So consider what their total effective HP is, and consider how you think you're going to get there. Right? So sometimes something as simple as a well-timed Command and Conquer can, do a bunch of damage to their armor. And that counts, and you're happy with that. Sometimes you can find, weird turn 1s where you, Alpha Rampage on turn 1 to push, 5 or 6 damage. That's great too. And other little bits of chip. So a good player really won't let you get very much chip against them because they know that you can come at them with that big 20 plus damage turn. So calculate their effective HP. Hope you see your Bloodrush Bellows at convenient times. That doesn't always mean necessarily at the top of your deck. It more so means you want your Bloodrush Bellows to come up on their less lethal turns. Like if you're holding a Bloodrush Bellow in hand and a Warrior hits you with Steelblade Supremacy, Warrior's Valor, into a Sword Swing, then it's, there's nothing you can do. You can't survive that. They will be able to hit you for 20-ish damage, get the counter, and your Bloodrush turn won't be able to kill them on the next turn, probably. So this is where we get into what I consider to be the real variance of this deck. The real variance of this deck isn't any kind of brute stuff that you're going to be discarding or rolling for. The real variance of this deck is the sheer strength of Bloodrush Bellow means the variance you need to worry about is when you see this in relation to your opponent. I think this deck really should go first in the vast majority of matchups. The one big exception, and this isn't a comprehensive list, so there may be other answers that are correct here. The one big exception is Warrior, and that's not because you want to go second. That's because you want to deny them going second. So I can say this deck also struggles against Guardian because Guardian runs, run 20 health, plus 10 points of armor, plus 2 sigils, plus Blessings of Deliverance, and they also run a Remembrance, which can, beat out your Remembrance explosions. So this deck does struggle against Guardian. It can be, I would call it a toss-up against Warrior, depending on who draws what sooner. And I would say that it's favored against Ira. I think it's particularly favored against Ira now that because they've lost Drone, a lot of them are pivoting more aggro, running the full kick line with leg tap and hurricane technique. So I think this deck has gotten better against Ira. And again, a big chunk of the reason on that is Ira's running 4 armor, not. Yeah, for sure. So I think that is a super valid question. I'll talk about notable exclusions to this deck. So I've already touched on Breakneck Battery and stuff like that. I'll talk about why I don't run Club in this deck either. But so, for example, the reason I don't want to run Art of War is because this whole suite of cards blocks awkwardly already. And I like any one of these more so than I like Art of War. Except maybe Blue Symbol. But the difference between a blue and a yellow kind of matters a lot because this deck is only running 10 blues, because you need a lot of those yellow 6 attacks to discard. Art of War it's mostly not in this deck because it doesn't block. And you'll notice the other things in here that don't block are in here for very specific reasons. So Springboard blocks suboptimally until it's in the arsenal, at which point it's a fantastic reaction. Remembrance doesn't block, but that's fine because it gets you back your Blood Rush Bellows, which I think is Blood Rush Bellow in Brute is a direct upgrade to Art of War, right? Art of War effectively gives you either +1 or go again and lets you draw 2 cards to replace itself, right? Because you're banishing the attack action to draw 2 cards every single time you play it. So I think Remembrance is here to get those Blood Rush Bellows back. Blood Rush Bellow is just a better Art of War. Energy Potion is here for going over the top in a lot of instances. It's also a good card to pay for things, and it's probably your best single card turn. So a lot of times what you do in this deck is just you block, and you wait for your big turn. This is a good thing to do while you're blocking, even though it doesn't block itself. You just drop it and you pass back to your opponent. But it enables those big turns in a much more productive way. Art of War, unless you're playing it on a Blood Rush Bellow turn or with Savage Feast, is extremely lackluster because all you're doing is getting yourself go again, and you're getting go again or +1 damage at the expense of 1 resource on a card that can block if you needed to. That's a very good question. Before I get into that, I'll answer the footnote because you mentioned Dan McKay's CC Brute deck, and in that, I think Art of War is great to put in there because, as he said in his interview after the 2K tournament, Art of War is just a worse Blood Rush Bellow, and you want more of those in your deck. But the big difference is in Classic Constructed, you can sideboard it out. So in the matchups where you're worried, that Warrior can come in and you want things that block for 3, you can take out, 1 or 2 copies of it. And I think that's the key difference. I do think it's a good card in CC. I think it definitely has a place. In Blitz, I don't like the fact that it doesn't block and that I can't replace it with something that blocks just before the match. Moving on to the unmovable question, I think it's a strong option, especially as Warrior is becoming more and more dominant in the meta. And you know what? Arguably, even since Ira has gone a bit more aggro, and you'll be seeing a lot more of those, flying kicks for 7 or that kind of thing. I do think I don't run it because it is expensive. The deck is already quite light on blues, and if I wanted to run Unmovable confidently, I would have to add some more blues, which would take away from some of the yellow attacks that have 6. And I think that I have a well-tuned number of those. Maybe you could give up, 1 or 2 to put in a yellow Unmovable and a blue to kind of pay for it. The other reason I'm hesitant to put it in is I'm already running enough awkward defense reactions because to kind of catch the middle of everything. Because I don't have a sideboard, I have all these weird cards to try to piece together. And when they don't piece together because you draw weirdly, then it's terrible. Like imagine if you're stuck with like you can already get stuck with Reckless Swing and Springboard Somersault in the same hand, which is very ugly. You've got 2 defense reactions. As a total, they block for 6, but they're going to cost you 3 cards. What you want to do is you want to arsenal the Springboard on your next turn, basically no matter what. But if you play the Reckless Swing, then you have a chance of discarding the Springboard, which is, borderline suicidal, because you lose 2 of your, 6 defense reactions, realistically only 3 of which are good defense reactions. And I think having Unmovable makes that process that it's one more awkward card that you can draw, and it's not a risk I'm willing to take necessarily. I think it's an option if you tweak some of this other stuff here. I could see an argument for taking out 1 Reckless Swing to put in 1 yellow Unmovable, and then swap out,